It started with a map. I wasn't the type to go seeking out haunted places or hunting for ghosts in dark, forgotten corners. That was more my friend Chris's thing. If you met him, you'd know what I mean. The kind of person who lives for stories about cursed artifacts, ancient ruins, and all that paranormal nonsense. The type who spends more time listening to ghost hunters on podcasts than actually doing anything normal. Chris, he was always talking about some place or another, somewhere he wanted to visit, something he wanted to explore. He'd come to me with stories, eyes lit up with this wild look, like he'd just found the secret of the universe tucked between the lines of some dusty old book. Half the time, I humored him, pretending I believed. The other half, I tuned him out. But this time, he showed up with something in his hands, something that caught my attention. A map. And not just any map. No, this one looked like it had been through hell and back. The edges were frayed and yellowed, the ink fading in places, but the lines and symbols still stood out, haunting in their own way. "Take it," he said, like it was some sacred object he was entrusting to me. "It leads to a lake hidden in the mountains. A lake that, well, there's something about it. People say it's haunted or cursed. No one really knows, but there's something there." I almost laughed, but the look in his eyes kept me quiet. He wasn't kidding. And the map, it was strange. I don't know why, but something about it tugged at me. Maybe it was the cryptic little symbols scattered along the path, or the way certain spots were marked with tiny hand-drawn notes in a language I didn't understand. I told myself it was nonsense, a gimmick, some old family heirloom Chris was using to mess with me. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Days passed, and each time I closed my eyes, that map seemed to flash behind them. Those jagged lines, the lake drawn in dark ink, the little scrawls I couldn't decipher. I kept hearing Chris's voice too, daring me to go, to see it for myself. Just for a laugh, I told myself. Just to say I did. What's the harm? I packed light. A backpack, water, a flashlight, the usual stuff. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I barely even told Chris, just shot him a message saying, "I'm checking out your lake. Don't expect a postcard." I followed the map. It felt silly, like some childhood treasure hunt. But the directions were weirdly clear. The path marked on the map matched the trail surprisingly well, like it had been drawn by someone who had walked it 1,000 times, someone who knew each turn and twist. The further I went, the more I felt the pull, like something was guiding me forward. The deeper I got, the quieter everything became. You don't think about it much in the beginning. The silence. You think it's peaceful, relaxing. But then you realize there are no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just this heavy, thick quiet that settles over you like a blanket. It started to feel wrong. There was this spot right around midday when I stopped to check my bearings. I looked up from the map, and that's when I saw it. A mark on a tree, a tiny symbol carved into the bark. It looked exactly like one of the symbols on the map, a little squiggle I'd seen near the lake's outline. I laughed it off. Some coincidence, I told myself. Maybe Chris had carved it there as a joke. But a few minutes later, I saw another one. Then another. They were everywhere. Tiny carvings etched into tree trunks, rocks, even a broken-down fence post that looked older than I could guess. The path kept winding, twisting deeper into the forest, and soon I felt like I was miles from anywhere. The trees grew taller, the branches thicker, blocking out most of the light. The ground beneath me was covered in soft moss, thick and lush, and it muffled every step like the forest was swallowing the sound. I remember feeling like I wasn't alone, like something was watching me. I kept glancing back, expecting to see, I don't know what. Maybe Chris, grinning like an idiot, or some curious hiker. But there was nothing. Just the trees, dark and looming, and the strange quiet pressing in on me. I kept going. Eventually the trees thinned and I could see it, the lake. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The water was black, pitch black, with a faint shimmer across the surface that reminded me of oil. It was so still, like a mirror, reflecting the trees and sky in a way that made it hard to tell where the lake ended and the shore began. I stood there, staring, feeling this uneasy tug in my chest. I thought about turning back, about calling Chris and telling him it was all nonsense. But then I saw something on the shore, a small, weathered campsite, half buried in leaves and dirt. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked over, kicking aside some of the debris. There were old cans, a few scattered clothes, a sleeping bag torn and faded. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, left in a hurry. Something about it felt off, like whoever had been here had left for a reason. I didn't like it. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had watched them leave. I turned back to the lake, hoping for a distraction. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, just at the edge of hearing. It sounded like a whisper carried across the water. I couldn't make out the words, couldn't even be sure it was really there, but it sent a chill up my spine. "Hello?" I called, feeling foolish. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was so deep, I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent in my ears. I don't know why, but I waited. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the lake, hoping to hear it again, hoping to see something, anything, move in the water. But there was nothing, just that smooth, unbroken surface, black as night. I took a step back, feeling my skin prickle with unease. I told myself it was just a lake, just an empty, abandoned place, nothing to be afraid of. But as I turned to leave, I swear I heard it again, softer this time, like a whisper just under my breath. It was my name. I froze, heart pounding. My name, clear as day, like someone was standing right beside me. But when I looked, there was no one. Just the trees, the lake, and that strange creeping silence. I didn't stick around to listen for more. I walked quickly back to the trail, my head down, my pulse racing. The forest felt darker, the air heavier, like it was pressing in on me. I glanced back over my shoulder every few steps, half expecting to see something following me. The map didn't make sense anymore. The lines, the symbols, everything looked wrong, like it had shifted when I wasn't looking. I tried to retrace my steps, but the path seemed different, twisting and turning in ways I didn't remember. And then I saw another campsite, just like the first, abandoned and forgotten, a graveyard of old belongings scattered among the trees. Only this one, it looked newer. I wanted to turn around, to leave this whole ridiculous idea behind. But something held me there, an itch in the back of my mind. There was something about that lake, something that felt like it was waiting. My mind drifted back to the map, to those cryptic symbols scattered along the route. They felt almost familiar, like I'd seen them somewhere before. Maybe in an old book or a story Chris had mentioned in passing, but I couldn't quite place it. All I knew was that standing there, with that inky lake in front of me, those symbols felt like more than just marks on paper. They felt like warnings, signs left by someone who'd been here before. Someone who'd left, but never come back. I didn't want to think about that. It was just a lake, I told myself. Just some weird place in the mountains. There was nothing here, no ghost, no curse, no reason to feel this gnawing sense of dread. But the feeling wouldn't leave me. It crawled under my skin, made my hands shake just a little as I stood there, trying to convince myself that I was being ridiculous. And then I saw something move. It was just a ripple, a tiny disturbance on the surface of the water, like something had brushed just under it. I took a step closer, trying to see what it was, but the lake had gone still again, a perfect black mirror. I could see my own reflection in it, distorted by the angle, stretched and twisted by the water's unnatural stillness. For a moment, I thought I saw something else in that reflection, something just behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the trees, thick and silent, closing in around the lake like a wall. I turned back to the water, but the reflection was gone. Only the lake, dark and silent, stretching out in front of me. The air felt heavier, thicker somehow, like it was pressing down on me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, settling between my shoulders, and I knew I had to leave. This place wasn't right. I don't know why, but it felt wrong, like a place that was never meant to be found. I tried to remember the path I'd taken, to retrace my steps, but everything looked different. Twisted somehow, like the forest itself had shifted while I wasn't looking. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I just needed to keep my head, to stay calm and find the way back. But with each step, that feeling of being watched grew stronger, like there were eyes hidden in the trees, following my every move. I glanced over my shoulder, heart pounding, but there was nothing there, just shadows and silence. Then I heard it again. The whisper, soft and low, carried on the breeze, just loud enough to hear but too faint to understand. I told myself it was the wind, just the wind in the trees, but the voice sounded so familiar. Like someone I knew, someone I trusted. But it was wrong, twisted somehow, as if it was trying to mimic a sound it didn't quite understand. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing across the lake, but there was no answer, only that heavy, suffocating silence. I took a step back, away from the shore, and my foot hit something solid. I looked down and saw an old faded backpack lying in the dirt, half buried under leaves and moss. I knelt down, brushing the dirt away, and realized it was open, its contents scattered around it. There were clothes, torn and faded, a water bottle covered in grime, a flashlight with dead batteries. But there was one thing that caught my eye, something that made my blood run cold. It was a journal, the cover worn and brittle, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it, flipping through the pages, and saw lines of cramped handwriting, barely legible in the fading light. The words were smeared, as if written in a hurry, and I had to squint to make them out. The entries were short, frantic, each one growing more desperate than the last. The first few were simple, just notes about the journey, about how excited they were to reach the lake. But as I read on, the tone changed, shifting from excitement to fear to outright panic. "The lake, it's not right. There's something in it. I can feel it watching me, following me." My hands started to shake as I read, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I could almost feel their fear, their desperation, like a stain that had seeped into the pages. I tried to leave, but the path, it's gone. It's like the forest has closed in around me. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I don't know if I'll ever get out. The last entry was little more than a scrawl, the words jagged and uneven, as if they'd been written in the dark. "If anyone finds this, please, don't stay here. Leave before it finds you." I dropped the journal, my hands numb with shock. I didn't want to believe it. This was just some story, some prank, something Chris had set up to mess with me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was a truth to those words, a raw, undeniable fear that I couldn't ignore. I backed away from the shore, the weight of the journal still heavy in my hands. I could feel my heartbeat thundering in my chest, each beat echoing louder and louder until it was the only sound in that oppressive silence. I turned to leave, to find my way back, but my legs felt like lead, every step harder than the last. The forest had changed, somehow. The path I'd come down was gone, replaced by a tangled maze of roots and shadows that twisted and writhed in the dim light. I felt a surge of panic, a cold, creeping dread that settled in my bones. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything that would break that horrible, suffocating silence. But then, from somewhere deep within the forest, I heard it. A laugh, soft and hollow, echoing through the trees. It was distant, faint, like the whisper of a ghost, but it sent a chill down my spine that I couldn't shake. I looked back at the lake, at the dark, still water that seemed to stretch out forever, and for a moment, I thought I saw something. A shape, moving just beneath the surface, too fast to see but unmistakable. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing in the silence, each step louder than the last. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape that feeling. That sense of something lurking just out of sight, following me, watching me. By the time I stopped, I was out of breath, my chest heaving, my heart pounding in my ears. I looked around, desperate to see something familiar, but all I saw were trees, dark and endless, stretching out in every direction. And then I realized I was back at the lake. The shoreline stretched out in front of me, dark and silent, the water as still as ever. It was as if I'd never left, as if the forest itself had guided me back, trapping me in some twisted loop. I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking, my mind racing. I didn't understand. I'd followed the path, I'd done everything right, but the forest, it didn't want me to leave. And as I knelt there, staring at the water, I heard it again. That voice, soft and gentle, calling my name. Only this time, I recognized it. It was Chris's voice. There's a moment when panic turns cold, hardens into something that feels like ice under your skin. That's what I felt as I stood there, looking at the lake again, realizing I hadn't made it a single step further away. I wasn't one for superstition, but there was something deeply, horribly wrong. I thought about the stories Chris had told me, all those late-night tales that I used to brush off with a laugh, stories about people going missing, about places that were cursed, haunted, whatever you wanted to call it. places that drew you in and never let go. And now here I was, staring into that dark water, my own breath the only sound breaking the silence, wondering if I'd become another one of those stories. I needed to think straight, to stay calm. I told myself that this was just a trick of the woods, that maybe I'd gotten turned around somehow. I'd retrace my steps, take a different route, and this time I'd make sure to keep the lake at my back. But as I turned to leave, the map in my hand felt different, heavier somehow. I glanced down and saw something I hadn't noticed before. The symbols, they were glowing, faintly, barely a shimmer, but enough that I could see them, as if they were alive, pulsing with some strange energy. I told myself it was just the light, a reflection from the water. But deep down, I knew better. The forest felt different too. The air had changed, grown colder, thick with a dampness that clung to my skin. I couldn't hear anything. Not a single bird, not the rustling of leaves, nothing but the sound of my own footsteps echoing through the trees. I checked the map again, my hands shaking. The symbols looked different now, rearranged somehow. I tried to focus, to follow the lines as best I could, but the more I looked, the less sense it made. It was like trying to read something in a language I didn't understand, like the lines themselves were shifting, twisting into new shapes when I wasn't looking. I started walking, hoping that if I just kept moving, I'd find my way out. But no matter which direction I took, I always ended up back at the lake. Every path seemed to lead right back to that dark, inky water. It was as if the forest itself was bending around me, guiding me in circles. Then I heard it. At first it was faint, barely more than a whisper. But as I kept moving, the sound grew louder, clearer, until I could make out words. It was a voice, familiar yet twisted, distorted in a way that made my skin crawl. It was Chris. "Come back," it said, soft and gentle, like he was standing just a few feet away. "You can't leave yet." I froze, my blood turning to ice. Chris was miles away, back in the city, probably laughing at how he'd spooked me with that stupid map. There was no way he could be here, no way that voice was real. But it didn't stop. "Come back," it repeated, more insistent this time. "There's something I need to show you." I wanted to turn and run, to get as far away from that voice as I could, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The sound was coming from all directions, echoing through the trees, bouncing off the water. It was everywhere, surrounding me, filling my head with this horrible, nauseating sense of wrongness. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just my mind playing tricks on me. But the voice kept calling, growing louder, more urgent, twisting into something that didn't sound like Chris at all. It was deeper now, distorted, like it was coming from a throat that wasn't human. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but the sound was inside my head, pulsing with every beat of my heart. It felt like claws scratching at the inside of my skull, like something was digging its way in, trying to find a way through. And then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped. I lowered my hands, my ears ringing in the silence. The forest was still, the lake as dark and silent as ever. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that the voice had been nothing more than a trick of my mind. But then I saw something move. It was just a shadow, a flicker of movement on the edge of my vision. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just trees, silent and unmoving, their branches stretched out like skeletal arms. I took a step back, my heart pounding, and that's when I felt it. A chill that sank into my bones, colder than anything I'd ever felt before. It was as if the air itself had turned to ice, seeping into my skin, filling my lungs with a cold that made it hard to breathe. I looked around, desperate for any sign of a way out, and that's when I saw them. Notes, scratched into the bark of a tree, faint but visible in the dim light. I moved closer, running my fingers over the rough surface, feeling the words carved deep into the wood. "Don't stay. It knows you're here." I stumbled back, my heart racing. The words felt like a warning, a message left by someone who'd been here before, someone who'd seen what I was starting to see. I looked around, and that's when I noticed more of them, scattered across the trees, etched into rocks, hidden in the shadows. It feeds on memory. Once you see it, you can't leave. My hands started to shake as I read, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Each word felt like a nail in my coffin, a reminder that I was trapped, that this place had me in its grip and wasn't about to let go. I turned back to the lake, feeling a horrible sense of dread settle in my chest. The water was rippling now, tiny waves breaking the surface, as if something massive was moving just beneath. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, but there was no breeze, no movement in the trees, nothing that could explain it. And then I saw it. A shadow, rising slowly from the depths, dark and massive, stretching out across the water. I couldn't see its shape, couldn't make out any details, but I knew it was watching me, knew it was waiting, biding its time. I backed away, my eyes locked on that dark shape, and that's when I saw something glinting on the ground. A watch. Half buried in the dirt, its face cracked, the hands frozen at midnight. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, and felt a chill run down my spine. It was old, the leather strap worn and brittle, but it was familiar. I'd seen it before in a photo, a picture of a man who'd gone missing in these woods years ago, a story Chris had told me, laughing like it was just another ghost story. I dropped the watch, my heart pounding, and that's when I noticed more of them, scattered across the ground. A wallet, a broken compass, a faded photograph. Belongings left by people who had come here before, people who had never made it out. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing made sense anymore. The trees, the lake, even the ground beneath my feet felt like it was shifting, changing with every step I took. I didn't know where I was, didn't know how long I'd been here, didn't even know if I'd ever really left the lake at all. I tried to remember my own life, to hold on to something real, something that would anchor me. But the memories felt distant, like they were slipping away, dissolving into the fog that clung to the trees. My name. I couldn't remember my own name. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp, and I stumbled back, my mind spinning. I tried to hold on to the memories, to cling to something real, but it was like trying to catch smoke, like every thought, every memory was being pulled from my mind piece by piece. And then I saw them. Figures, ghostly and pale, drifting through the trees, their faces twisted in fear, their eyes wide and empty. They moved in slow, aimless loops, like they were trapped in some endless nightmare, reliving their last moments over and over again. One of them turned, locking eyes with me, and I felt a surge of terror so intense it nearly knocked me off my feet. I recognized that face. It was the man from the photograph, the man who had gone missing, who had left his watch here in the dirt. He reached out, his hand trembling, his eyes filled with a silent plea. And I knew he was trying to tell me something, trying to warn me. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there, frozen in place. And then, as quickly as they had appeared, the figures vanished, fading back into the shadows, leaving me alone with nothing but the echo of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't know how long I stood there, my mind reeling, my body numb with terror. Time felt meaningless, slipping through my fingers like sand, each second dragging me deeper into this nightmare. The lake was waiting, the forest was closing in, and I knew, deep down, that I was running out of time. The cold was relentless, seeping into every part of me, making it hard to even think. My thoughts felt sluggish, like they were drifting away, lost somewhere in that dark water, taken by whatever was waiting beneath the surface. I told myself to keep moving, to keep searching for a way out, but each step felt heavier than the last, as if the forest itself was pressing down on me, pushing me back towards the lake. I kept hearing that voice, Chris's voice, calling out from the shadows. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the rocks, growing louder with every step. I knew it wasn't him, knew it couldn't be, but the sound clawed at me, digging its way into my mind, filling me with this horrible, gnawing sense of dread. "Come back," it whispered, softer now, almost pleading. "You don't belong out there." I shook my head, trying to block it out, but the words kept coming, each one more twisted, more distorted, as if the voice was decaying, rotting away into something dark and hollow. And with each word, the forest grew darker, the shadows thicker, closing in around me like a shroud. I looked down at the map, hoping it would guide me, but the symbols were gone. The lines had faded, leaving nothing but blank paper in my hands. I felt a surge of panic, a cold, gut-wrenching fear that I couldn't ignore. I was alone, completely and utterly alone, with nothing but the sound of that voice echoing in my mind. The sun was starting to set, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. I didn't want to stay here after dark, didn't want to know what might come crawling out of the lake once the light was gone. But no matter how fast I moved, no matter how far I went, I always ended up right back at the shore, staring into that inky, motionless water. And as the last light faded, as the sky turned a deep, foreboding shade of blue, I felt it. A presence lurking just beyond the trees, watching me, waiting. I don't know how to describe it. It was more than just a feeling, more than just fear. It was a weight, a suffocating pressure that wrapped itself around me, filling my lungs with ice, making it hard to breathe. I could feel it in the air, in the ground beneath my feet, in every shadow that stretched out from the trees. It was the lake. I could feel its hunger, its need, pressing in on me, pulling me closer, whispering promises I didn't want to understand. I stumbled back, my hands shaking, my heart racing in my chest. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, had to find some way to escape this place before it swallowed me whole. But every step felt like a struggle, like the forest itself was fighting against me, holding me in place, refusing to let me go. And then, in the fading light, I saw something etched into the rocks near the shore, a message carved deep into the stone, barely visible in the twilight. It takes your memories, leaves you empty. I felt a chill run down my spine, colder than anything I'd felt before. The words were rough, jagged, as if they'd been carved in a hurry, with hands that were shaking, desperate. I ran my fingers over the letters, feeling the grooves, the roughness of the stone. It was real, solid, something left behind by someone who had been here before. And I realized, with a sick, sinking feeling, that I was seeing the remnants of those who had come here before me. People who had tried to escape, who had fought against the pull of the lake, but had been swallowed whole, their memories taken, their lives reduced to nothing more than empty shadows. I looked down at my hands, at the map that had once held so much promise, and I felt a terrible sense of loss, as if a part of me was already gone, lost to that dark, unyielding water. The lake was stealing from me. Piece by piece, it was taking everything I had, everything I was, leaving me hollow, empty. I could feel it, like a cold hand reaching into my mind, pulling at my memories, unraveling them one by one. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept that this was happening. But with each passing second, I felt myself slipping further, my memories fading, dissolving into the fog that clung to the trees. My family, my friends, even Chris, they were nothing but shadows, fading echoes that I couldn't hold on to. And then I saw them. Figures, ghostly and pale, drifting through the trees, their faces twisted in fear, their eyes wide and empty. They moved in slow, aimless loops, like they were trapped in some endless nightmare, reliving their last moments over and over again. One of them turned, locking eyes with me, and I felt a surge of terror so intense it nearly knocked me off my feet. I recognized that face. It was the man from the photograph, the man who had gone missing, who had left his watch here in the dirt. He reached out, his hand trembling, his eyes filled with a silent plea, and I knew he was trying to tell me something, trying to warn me. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there, frozen in place. And then, as quickly as they had appeared, the figures vanished, fading back into the shadows, leaving me alone with nothing but the echo of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't know how long I stood there, my mind reeling, my body numb with terror. Time felt meaningless, slipping through my fingers like sand, each second dragging me deeper into this nightmare. The lake was waiting, the forest was closing in, and I knew, deep down, that I was running out of time. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring into that darkness, feeling it press in around me. The weight of the forest, the silence, the shadows, all of it bore down on me until I felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something worse, something that reached down into my very bones, whispering to me, pulling me closer to the lake, whispering promises I couldn't quite understand. Somewhere in my mind, a part of me knew I had to get out, had to run. But another part of me, one that was stronger, louder, was telling me to give in, to sink into that silence, to let the lake take whatever it wanted. I forced myself to take a step back, but my legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone. I could barely lift them, barely even move. It was as if the lake had wrapped itself around me, binding me to the shore, holding me in place. And then, from somewhere deep within the forest, I heard it again. A voice, It was soft at first, barely more than a whisper. But as it grew louder, I recognized it. That same twisted, distorted voice that had been haunting me since I'd arrived. Chris. Or something that wanted me to believe it was him. "You can't leave," it said, echoing through the trees, bouncing off the water, twisting in ways that made my skin crawl. "You belong to me now." I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but my body wouldn't obey. All I could do was stand there, trapped in that horrible silence, listening to that voice as it wormed its way into my mind, filling me with images I didn't want to see. I saw myself, standing on the shore, staring into the lake, my face pale and hollow, my eyes empty. I saw my memories slipping away, dissolving into that dark water, leaving me nothing but a shell, a shadow, a ghost doomed to wander these woods for eternity. I tried to shake the images away, to hold on to something real, something that would anchor me to the world outside. But every thought, every memory, felt like it was slipping further and further out of reach, sinking into the depths of the lake, lost forever. And then, in one last desperate attempt, I screamed. I don't know if anyone heard me. I don't even know if I made a sound. But in that moment, something broke. The silence shattered, and I was able to move again, to tear myself away from the shore, to turn my back on that dark, unyielding water. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, didn't even know if I was moving in the right direction. All I knew was that I had to get away, to put as much distance between myself and the lake as I could. The forest closed in around me, the branches tearing at my skin, the shadows wrapping around me like chains, but I kept going, forcing myself to move, to keep running. The voice followed me, echoing through the trees, growing louder with every step. It sounded angry now, twisted and dark, filled with a rage that made my skin crawl. "You can't escape," it whispered, harsh and cruel. "You're mine." I stumbled, falling to my knees, my hands sinking into the cold, damp earth. The forest felt alive around me, pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to seep into my skin, filling me with a fear so intense it felt like it was tearing me apart. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it take me. I pushed myself to my feet, forcing my legs to move, to carry me through the trees, past the shadows, away from that horrible, twisted voice. The path was unfamiliar, the forest a maze of darkness and silence, but I kept going, fueled by a desperation I'd never felt before. And then, just as I was about to give up, to let the darkness swallow me whole, I saw it. A light. It was faint, barely more than a glimmer in the distance, but it was enough to give me hope, to drive me forward. I stumbled towards it, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps, and as I got closer, I realized it was a cabin, a small, weathered building hidden among the trees. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me, my hands trembling as I locked it, bolting it as tightly as I could. The silence outside was deafening, pressing in around me, but I could still feel the lake, its presence lurking just beyond the trees, waiting, watching. I stumbled to the floor, my body weak, my mind spinning, and that's when I saw it. A journal, lying on the ground, open to the last page. The handwriting was shaky, desperate, and as I read the words, a cold chill ran down my spine. "If you found this, you need to leave. Don't stay here. Don't look back. The lake, it's hungry. It's waiting. And once it finds you, it won't let you go." The words felt like a death sentence, a warning left by someone who had been here before, someone who had seen what I had seen, felt what I was feeling. I wanted to run, to leave this place and never look back, but as I stood there, staring at the journal, I knew that it wasn't over, that the lake still had me in its grasp, that its hunger wasn't satisfied. I turned back to the door, my hands shaking, my mind racing. I knew what I had to do, knew that I couldn't stay here, couldn't let the lake take any more of me. But as I reached for the door, a voice echoed in my mind, soft and insistent, whispering words I didn't want to hear. "You can't escape," it said, twisting through my thoughts, filling me with a dread so deep it felt like it was eating me alive. "You belong to me now." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, forcing myself to ignore the voice, to push past the fear that clawed at my mind. I had to leave, had to find a way out, before the lake took everything from me. And so, with one last, desperate surge of strength, I opened the door and stepped outside, into the cold, silent forest. The path stretched out before me, dark and twisted, but I kept moving, driven by a determination I couldn't explain. a will to survive that refused to be snuffed out. As I walked, the voice grew fainter, the shadows less oppressive, and for a moment I thought I was free, thought I had escaped the lake's grasp. But then, just as I reached the edge of the forest, I felt it. A presence, lurking in the darkness, watching me, waiting. I turned, and there it was. The lake, stretching out before me, dark and still, its surface rippling with a hunger that sent a chill down my spine. I knew in that moment that it would never let me go, that it would haunt me for the rest of my life, a shadow that would follow me wherever I went. And so, if you're reading this, if you found these words, please, listen to me. Don't come here. Don't look for the lake. Don't let it find you, because once it does, it won't ever let you go. Run. Leave this place behind and don't ever look back. I can't save myself, but maybe I can save you.